Cybersecurity podcast. This is podcast number one. So we appreciate you being here on our debut. Today, we are going to be discussing end of life and legacy systems. We're going to talk about how you can increase your security. We're going to talk about what they are. And today we have Mike Shin with us, who is going to go through all of these little baubles with us. So welcome, Mike. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And the first thing we want to do, I think, is to define what an end-of-life software system is. What is legacy? Can you tell us that?
So it's sort of two buckets there, right? So a legacy system is more of a term of art in the industry. It just kind of it includes end-of-life systems, but it also can just include things that people think of as maybe less modern or maybe using some different kind of computing paradigm or whatever the case may be. So, you might say, Solaris is a legacy operating system. I happen to think it's a great operating system personally, but that's something that might sort of fit into that. Whereas something like Steam OS, on a Steam Deck, you wouldn't call that legacy, right? This is cutting edge stuff for playing video games.
Mhm.
End of life means that the vendor, the community, whomever it is that maintains this product or operating system, whatever the case may be, is no longer supporting it. So there aren't any patches anymore for it. That's kind of the biggest issue with an end of life system. Now, there's different vendors that have different definitions of what they consider end of life. Some vendors will say, it's end of life, but you can get an extended support contract. In other words, we're not making patches available to our customers, but if you pay us for this other support package, we'll continue to provide you with patches for some period of time. But generally, end of life means we as the vendor are no longer supporting this product. We're done with it, and we're moving on to something else. So Windows XP is end of life, right? Or Microsoft, we're
Mm.
not going to make anything available for this anymore.
Okay. So I know there are probably lots of reasons why an organization might want to con continue using these end-of-life systems. So what are some of the reasons why they might want to do that instead of upgrading?
Really, the biggest reason is it works, right? We have a system or systems. They've been doing something for us. It works fine. We don't need any more features for it, right? We've worked out all the bugs and whatnot. Everybody's comfortable with it. That's pretty much the biggest reason, right? It's I think if people had their druthers, unless there is some compelling reason to upgrade, right? We're all happy with what we have. Maybe we want faster hardware or maybe some more bells and whistles, but I'm good with it and leave me alone. And for everything else in life, that tends to be the case, right? I've got tools in my garage that are at least as old as I am. I've got a bandsaw in there from the 70s that's great. It works just fine. I don't need a new one. um, you know, the new features they're nothing that I would care about. I mean, the only reason I would replace it is if it was broken and I couldn't repair it myself, right? So for nearly everything in our lives, unless it's broken or unless there's some fashionable reason to replace it, we generally stick with things as long as they continue to work. So, maybe we get a new car because we like the newer car, but cars are expensive, right? If I could keep driving my car forever, um, you know, especially at my age, right? I don't care anymore, right? I don't need something fancy, right? I'm happy, to great, it's not to single out Toyota, but great cars, right? I've got one that's got almost 150,000 miles on it. That's to me a great investment, right? I don't have no interest in buying a new car from them, until this one stops working. So that is also true for computing systems. They may be expensive. The hardware might have been expensive. The software might have been expensive. Whatever it might be, it kind of boils down to it works. And why would we upgrade if we don't need it to do anything else?
Yeah, my guess is also maybe some government agencies might have specific software that was written for a specific OS and they just,
Or maybe a very specific purpose, right?
yeah.
There, the government agency is a good example, right? Like, maybe you're the IRS, right? And you're a company that wrote the software to help the IRS process tax returns. How many other customers in the entire world need that software, right? They've got one customer basically, so, they may be heavily invested in that technology, and that's entirely understandable. I mean, there are many examples of companies and government agencies, trying to upgrade and move away from some solution to something new. And, there are risks associated with that. You're replacing the technology. And there could be reasons completely unrelated to that as well. But
Hmm.
risk is sort of the biggest one, right? I'm going to move from this operating system to a different operating system. I'm going to move from this vendor to another vendor. So there's all kinds of time and money and whatnot that goes into moving your, let's say, your financial systems over to a new platform, or your CRM or your ERP or whatever the case may be. So it's not as simple as I upgraded my phone from version 14 to version 15, right? It may be very hard to do. It may also
Yeah.
be that you aren't allowed to do it, right?
Hmm.
Maybe you're a regulated entity, and changing that means that you're no longer using a version that has been certified or blessed or assessed by a regulator to say that it's okay to use it. Their cryptography in the federal government is an example of that. There's a certification process under the Federal Information Processing Standards where cryptographic modules have to be certified by an appropriately credentialed entity. And if it's not certified, you're not supposed to use it.
Hmm.
So maybe the new platform doesn't have that certification. So that could be a thing as well. It may be, too, that changing from an end of life operating system presents a real risk. So let's say a nuclear power plant has computing systems that they use to monitor the reactor. And those computing systems are very resilient and reliable and have demonstrated that over a period of maybe decades. And you have adequate spare parts and so on and so forth. So if something goes wrong with the computer, you can fix it, replace it, and so on. But moving to a brand new operating system and new software to do that presents a nearly infinite number of unknowns. Don't know
Hmm.
if it's going to be as reliable. So there may be no value in moving from an end of life operating system to something new. Like, what do you get, right? It's a I don't need any more bells and whistles and features. I need to be able to do some, let's say, fairly basic things. I need to know the temperature and the pressure of this vessel. And I have a computer that collects that data and monitors it and lets us know if something's going to go wrong. I don't need any more than that. So why would I change to some unknown that might not work as well, that might crash or be unreliable or whatever the case may be? So there are absolutely good reasons to not touch something and to continue
Yeah,
to use an end of life operating
your
system.
description with the nuclear power plants is definitely a good one. We want them to just keep doing what they're doing because so far it's working, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just not change those.
Yeah. I mean, as an aside, what Western power reactors, the United States, Canada, so on and so forth. There's never been a death from a commercial nuclear reactor.
That's amazing.
Go ahead and Google that, folks. There has not been a death from commercial nuclear reactor for a Western reactor. Chernobyl, not a Western reactor, completely different design. Email me if you want to know more about this. I'd be happy to tell you. But it demonstrates, like from an engineering perspective, it's possible to build things that are safe, right? And if it's working well, why mess with that?
Right.
Especially when the consequences of failure, like a nuclear reactor, for example, can be pretty severe, right?
Hmm.
So we have to be careful what we do. And that's not in any way, shape, or form to just single out nuclear power. There are lots of things in life where we want things to be reliable. We want our banks to be reliable, right? We want to make sure that our, what's in our account is correct, that there's not some error in the system and money just disappears.
We want our
So
satellites for our
those
phones to
we
work.
want, right. I mean, those are examples of things where the consequences of change could be severe. We need to know that this thing is going to continue to be reliable, that its results are trustworthy, and upgrading and replacing it without some other obvious, reason to do so, is may present an unacceptable risk.
Okay. Well, we definitely know those are all really good reasons as to why you may not want to update your system from an end of life. That those are definitely great reasons. So, why would an end of life system seem like more of a target for cyber attacks to bad operators?
Yeah, really two things. Obsolescence, which I'll talk about in a second, and kind of the big one for most people, lack of support, and specifically lack of security patches and information from the vendor about security vulnerabilities that you should be aware of, that you need to manage and mitigate appropriately. So we'll take patching. Patching
Mm,
for many people is a very significant part of their security strategy. And the lack of patches from a vendor means they no longer have that tool to use. And there are ways to manage unpatched vulnerabilities. If patching was all we needed to do to be secure, then there would be no security products. There'd be no antivirus. There'd be no firewalls, no intrusion detection, so on and
mhm,
so forth, right? So patching is not enough to manage vulnerabilities. Being fully patched does not mean you don't have vulnerabilities. Even if your thing is not end of life, you may, and quite frankly do, have vulnerabilities in that system. Those vulnerabilities may be there because the vendor doesn't want to fix it for some reason. Maybe they've made a judgment call that they think it's too hard to exploit, or they think that if you're using the software the way they want you to, that um, that vulnerability isn't realistic or not something you should need to worry about. So one, being fully patched doesn't mean that you don't have vulnerabilities. Sometimes vendors and security researchers fundamentally disagree. Security folks say, hey, this is a vulnerability. And a vendor can say, yeah, it's supposed to work that way, and I'm not going to fix it. So, those problems exist even if we can patch something. But with an end of
mhm,
life operating system, we don't have patches anymore. So all of that goes out the window, right? Now you definitely have unpatched vulnerabilities in this thing. And as time goes by, that list gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it may be now the kinds of vulnerabilities that exist in it are extremely critical vulnerabilities. You can't have this thing anywhere near the internet, or anywhere near people who you absolutely don't trust. So that's a big one. That's a huge one for folks, for everyone really. The other one is just obsolescence. The technologies that an end of life system are using may be just inherently insecure.
mhm.
Maybe your product uses Telnet, for example, which, for those of you that haven't used Telnet, that is an unencrypted, unauthenticated. Well, I mean, the protocol is unauthenticated, but it's unencrypted protocol for logging into computers, right? Very easy to hijack a Telnet session. I mean, very easy to do. I mean, we are doing it back in the early 90s. It's so easy to do. So imagine what it's like now. So if you had something using that protocol, and that was something you needed to ensure didn't happen, there's not really, and the vendors stop supporting it. You have to figure out some other way to manage that risk, right? It's obsolete. Cryptography is another example. That's a constantly moving target. Bad guys are figuring out new ways, good guys too, to defeat cryptography. So, a cipher that might have been good in the 90s, like DES, the digital encryption standard, is no longer good. Now we're on to, other ciphers. And in time, those also will fall by the wayside. Quantum computing will make, various things obsolete. So those are kind of the two big categories of reasons that you, from a security perspective, would want to replace an end of life system. You no longer have a vendor looking out for you. They're not putting out patches. They're not letting you know that there's a vulnerability in something, which is a big deal all by itself. Even if they're not going to fix a vulnerability, oftentimes vendors will let you know that it exists. Maybe they provide you with some remediation instructions. Hey, this is the way it's supposed to be. But if you're using it differently, here's what you should do to maybe configure the system or protect it. All of that is gone. So you're not going to know if there's something that you need to defend against. And then it's just obsolete, right? It's it's doing something that is just inherently insecure, and you're going to
Right.
need to figure out some other way to protect it.
Yeah. So if you are running these end of life systems, which you've already discussed, there are reasons why you might do that, and it's not being supported anymore by the vendor. Let's say you just take that and run with it. What
Right.
is the risk of doing nothing to protect that system? Like just letting it ride?
In general, huge, right?
Yeah.
Now you're just living on hopes and dreams, and nothing bad is going to happen. But there are things that you can do to protect end of life operating systems. And there are end of life operating systems all over the world that continue to operate, and they're able to operate in reasonably secure ways. I mean, you could do something maybe as simple as these systems are no longer plugged into a network that can get to the internet and vice versa. Maybe it's in an isolated area where the only people that physically have access to it are already trusted. In other words, if these folks were to do something bad, it's game over in other cases, like a nuclear reactor, for example, right? A nuclear power plant operator can already do things on their own. So, maybe the computers are in an area where only the operators can get to. So common sense would say that's good enough, right? They don't
Hmm.
need to hack the computers. They could just take a hammer to something, right? So, you can apply common sense to these problems too and say, what is it exactly that we're trying to do? What is the risk that we're trying to manage? How can we appropriately protect this system or systems in that case? So there are things you can do. I mean, these are things you should be thinking about anyway, right?
Of course.
Your security strategy should not be, don't worry, it's patched, right? That's not enough, right?
Hope and pray.
It's
Hope and
great.
pray.
It's great that you're doing it, right? Go ahead, by all means, you should, but that's not enough, right? There are going to be vulnerabilities in things that are known that for some reason or another are just not addressed. We talked about that, and there are unknown vulnerabilities. You don't know about them. The vendor doesn't know about them, but the bad guys know about them. There
Right.
are financial incentives for bad guys to do their own research, figure out how to break into things, and not to tell anyone about that. So, if you're being diligent about patching your stuff, excellent. Just know that that's not enough, right? There's you got to do more than that.
Well, that's all we have for today. This has definitely been enlightening and eye-opening, and I thank you for your time today, Mike. We are going to continue this discussion in our next podcast. We'll be going over ways that we can get those end-of-life systems up to date on security and compliance. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Mike, and goodbye.
All right, guys.